Glasgow, now where the United Nations Climate Summit has gone into overtime as delegates try to reach an agreement on a draft plan to protect the planet from catastrophic global warming. Representatives from over 200 countries are negotiating to cut global warming at 1.5 degrees. Now, for this to happen, the world needs to cut emissions by 45% by 2030 and energy of carbon neutrality by 2050. Sticking points include subsidies for coal and other fossil fuels and financial help to poorer nations. Joining us from Glasgow to speak further on this as it relates to Nigeria is environmentalist Ijoma Stanley. Good morning, Ijoma. Good to have you on the program this morning, Ijoma. Can you please unmute? Ijoma, please unmute so that we can hear you.
Sorry, good morning. Yeah, good morning. Okay. It's my pleasure to be here. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. You're welcome. And now tell us, COP26 is wrapping up and, our president made a commitment. But then what's the deal actually for countries like Nigeria and for poorer nations as far as the state of the global environment is concerned? What's the deal for us?
Yeah, the deal is actually to, for poorer countries and countries in the global south, is actually climate finance, financing the energy transition and financing the technology transition, because the whole of this climate crisis, the whole of the energy transition is actually a technology transition. So for countries like Nigeria, climate finance is high on the agenda. And this has been a sticking point, it has been a pressure point in the whole negotiation. And if you look at the hypocrisy, which has also shown itself manifested here during the COP26 of the countries of the global north, you see the money they are pumping into fossil fuel as against trying to meet up their inability to meet up the $100 billion commitment in the Paris Agreement. So that hypocrisy is there, and it's something that most people here are not really happy about. So for countries like Nigeria, our focus should be on how we can leverage international climate and carbon finance to be able to transition, finance our energy transition. So the president committed us to net zero by 2060. And I am wondering where that came from, because I know that the long-term strategy of Nigeria, which was launched like some 2-3 months ago, committed us to 50% reduction by 2050. So this is new to me, and I'm wondering where we are going to get both the resources and also, yes, President Buhari has shown political will, but then if he leaves and the next person that comes, where are we going to get the needed resources, both financial and non-financial resources, the technical expertise and all of that, to be able to drive this transition? We're not making enough investment in capacity building, but locally. And we've seen that we cannot depend entirely on the countries, the developed countries, who actually caused this problem, to be able to protect ourselves from the disruptive and destructive impacts of climate change. So we have to take some responsibility at some point in time. And that is why the energy transition, we can't run away from it. So we have to face it frontally and really be very strategic in trying to see how we can even leverage, again, I come to climate finance, to leverage international support, international climate finance, international carbon finance, to be able to drive finance our own development agenda. And of course, that agenda has to be, it doesn't have to be linear, the wasteful linear economic model. It has to be secular. And that is really where the future is.
That was going to be my question, actually, about the commitment President Buhari gave, which is to reach net zero by 2060. So you are saying that it's not realistic at this point. Well, it brings me to my next question, which is the Lake Chad Basin. At one point, it was one of Africa's largest freshwater bodies and a source of livelihood for about 30 million people. And now it's vanishing because of climate change. Surprisingly, it wasn't a key topic at the climate change conference. I would like your assessment on, first, Lake Chad and why you think it wasn't even on the front burner there.
You see, you have almost 200 countries, each with its own unique peculiarities, unique socio-political, socio-economic circumstances coming to the table. So, and if you are not careful, you are going to lose focus. You are going to get drawn into some other person's agenda. And that is why for countries in Africa, adaptation is key. For countries in the global north, they have made it a point to raise the profile of mitigation. Yes, we know mitigation and adaptation, right? But then mitigation is far high up there in terms of priority of the developed countries. And these industrialized nations are pushing everybody towards that direction. And you can also see it in the level of climate finance going to adaptation versus vis-a-vis the one going to mitigation. So these issues are there. For us, it is climate finance. For us, it is how to get the technology to be able to to drive this energy transition. Lake Chad, it's something. It has become the poster impact of climate change. The example of what we talk about when we cry and really put this try to mainstream climate change into economic development blueprints. Lake Chad, for those who don't know, this is a miracle that is in the Sahel. It's a 25 square kilometer body of water. It used to be a 25 square kilometer body of water in the middle of the desert, providing resources, providing livelihood for 4 countries, more than 50 million families in 4 countries. So now Lake Chad has lost more than 90% of its water body. This thing didn't happen overnight. Why did we not take up those issues? And you now see the kind of insecurity it is breeding in that area. Because if you have 30 million families in 4 countries, the 4 Lake Chad countries of Nigeria, Chad, Cameroon, and Niger, stripped of their livelihood. Because if the water is drying, then it's stripping them of their livelihood. Those who were into fishing can no longer fish. Those who depend on that lake for their livelihood, for agriculture, to support their families, they can no longer do that. And you now see a lot of young people there becoming a willing tool in the hands of the terrorist organizations operating, terrorist groups operating in those in the Lake Chad axis. So this is really why adaptation is key for us. And the Lake Chad shouldn't be consumed or subsumed by any other. For us, that's the biggest emergency. And we also should not lose sight of what is happening in the coastal littoral states in the south. You have accelerated sea level rise. Communities are being displaced as we speak. And you see this displacement happening in the north and in the south. And that's really bringing a lot of pressure in the middle belt of Nigeria. And you see a lot of competition for food, fuel, and fiber, and creating a lot of increasing violent confrontation and competition for these resources. So this is key for us. And President Buhari has done well since 2015 that he came in. The previous presidents didn't really take this climate change issue seriously. But at least it is to the credit of President Buhari that he has shown up. He has always been on the table. So, but we need to do more. We really need to push that agenda, put it on the table, and try to get these people, the developed countries, to be able to pay their dues in terms of contributing to the solution as captured in the Paris Agreement. We are calling it climate aid. I was watching, they try to call it climate aid. It cannot be climate aid. This is polluter must pay. They caused this problem, and they cannot call it climate aid.
Polluter
right? So
must pay.
Polluter must pay. If you're not discerning, you will get lost. The meaning will just diffuse, and people will lose sight of the real issue. This is what they are paying for, the problem they caused, And I don't know how the African countries and the G77 plus China, how we've really allowed them to push us to this, put us in a position where we are almost becoming like, we are toothless bulldog, if I will use that term. So adaptation is key. Climate finance is key. For me, those are the two key takeaways.
Right. Well, speaking about a solution, this ambitious plan to restore the lake to its former glory, researchers say involves, multi-billion-dollar project that will channel water from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, should the federal government be looking towards that direction? Some say this plan is actually quite ridiculous. I don't know what you make of that.
Yeah, you see, there is nothing that the human being, the human mind, if it focuses on achieving something that is doable, right? But then it requires a lot of political will. Remember that Nigeria is not the only country affected. And if you are going to get water from the DRC, you are now going to need to be talking to other countries where this water will have to pass through. So it is that also brings up the issue of climate diplomacy, right? So we should be pushing Africa. We should be the voice of Africa. It's just recently, in the last 5, 6, 10 years, it used to be the former Ethiopian, the late Ethiopian Prime Minister, Meles Zenawi, who was the voice of Africa on these issues. So this is really where we should focus. Adaptation. How do we recharge the lake charge, right? Then there is also another proposal on the table where we need to now take out the silt, the organic matter that has accumulated over the years. So there are options on the table. But then the thing is, we need a lot of climate diplomacy. We need to bring a lot of countries to the table, and Nigeria should be leading on that. So it's very important that we are going to, when that happens, we are going to restore livelihood for millions of families in those 4 countries. And I think that is really when we are going to be able to address the issue of insecurity in the Lake Chad region, sustainably.
All right, Ijoma, thanks for those clarifications. Lake Chad basin is shrinking while the population is exploding, right. Major issues. But then I saw earlier when OG first asked, the first question, that you wanted to expand more on the commitment that the president made. And I would like you to do just that. Given the fact that the commitment that the president made at COP26 is slightly different from what the Vice President Yemi Osinbajo said, where he said that on climate change, Nigeria will focus more on what works for the country and for the people. But then at COP26, President Muhammadu Buhari is saying, from what you said earlier, as against the reduction by 50%, by 2050, that is going for a net zero emissions, by 2060. But this is a president under whose watch $3.8 billion will be borrowed to acquire shares in the Dangote refinery, etc. How do we reconcile, these seeming inconsistencies? And how can the president commit us to what clearly looks like we may not be able to deliver on less than 40 years from now?
And I really think that the handlers of Mr. President have to clarify that. Either he was misquoted, because that commitment is not based on any framework that I know. It's not based on any framework. We have to go back and clarify that. The presidency has to issue a statement, and they also have to balance the president's commitment in Glasgow here,
yes,
and the position of the vice president. Because in the lead up to the Glasgow COP26, the vice president has been everywhere, pushing and really forcefully the position that Nigeria would really have to use gas. Nigeria is more of a gas nation than a crude oil nation.
Yes.
So, and that we are going to leverage gas as our transition fuel. So these two positions we have to harmonize them. And we have to do that. The COP, the negotiations ended officially yesterday. but the negotiators are still trying to dot some I's and cross some T's. So this is the best time for us to clarify that. That has to come from the presidency, so that we are not, because if you cannot define the vision, then it becomes even difficult for the people you are leading to be able to key into that vision. So there is confusion already as to where we are headed, right? So fossil fuel, I'm not sure it's not for the reason of the lack of finance, or rather, let me put it this way: when we had finance, because the issue now is that the industrialized nations are now saying that they want to defund gas, fossil fuel, and if that happens, then they are now categorizing gas as part of the fossil fuel that they are going to be defunding. So when there was funding, before now, we had gas and we've had government. So why is it that we still have the highest number of people not having access to electricity? So these issues are we really have to get a little bit more serious in addressing these issues. Now, when we talk about these things are not abstract contraptions. We are talking about our health, right? So if you have been abusing the resources that God gave us, flaring gas for how many years now? If you go to Port Harcourt, you see we're having the soot epidemic in Port Harcourt. Every white surface now has a tint of soot in Port Harcourt. So you can imagine what this is doing to people's lungs. So it's basically saying that you're making a bonfire of people's lungs. So these things are, when we talk about environmental issues, when we talk about pollution reduction, emission reduction, we're actually talking about our health and talking about our livelihood. So if we are going to decarbonize our economy, it also means that we are going to reduce pollution. It also means that we are going to improve our public health. So these issues we have to see them as the issues that affect us directly, and not some abstract issues where we just go and make statements and come back and go back to business as usual. We're making investments in fossil fuel, 2 billion or 8 billion in Dangote refinery, fine, right? But then how are we saying one thing and doing the opposite? Again, this is what is also happening here at the international level. The industrialized nations are saying they want to move away from fossil fuel, but they are also pumping enormous resources into subsidizing fossil fuel. So this is where the problem is, walking the talk.
Really quickly, in less than a minute, if you can, talk to us about the conversation you had on Kano State at the Nigeria Pavilion, the event which highlighted achieving demethanization of the waste sector in Africa. What can we learn about that conversation?
Yes, there's a revolution happening in Kano, and I am happy to be leading, because my role is to connect this align it to national development plans and now international climate framework. So my role is to pull in international climate and carbon finance to be able to now address the challenge of unsustainable waste management in Kano State. So if we talk about circular economy, the waste sector, as you can see, everywhere you go in Nigeria, this is an embarrassment. So the governor of Kano State has come up with this policy innovation to say government can no longer do this. The era or the regime where you have state governments trying to be operators as well as regulators, it will not work. And it's the same thing that made our oil industry to fail, right? So the government is both an operator in the joint venture they had with the international oil companies. So the governor has outsourced the whole waste management to a private company that has the expertise to be able to deliver on this. Now, this is saving the state 47 billion naira.
Wow.
So in the next 20 years, they've said, because they are no longer investing, rather the partnership, the PPP, is now yielding revenue for the state. So if you are going to address waste management, then it also means that you are also addressing the sustainable development goals. And if you are doing that, climate action is also part of it. So if you want to decouple your economy, and that is what Kano is doing, to decouple Kano's economy from that over-reliance and dependence on petroleum at the national level. And a lot of resources, a lot of attention is now, global attention is now being channeled. What is happening in Kano is stimulating that kind of attention. So we came here, we held a side event where we introduced this, to the global climate resilient investor community. We had that conversation and it was well received. So it's really in the next, by the time we come back to Nigeria, Nigerians will see more of what is happening in Kano. On the 25th of October, we were with the Vice President, the Governor of Kano State, His Excellency Governor Ganduje, led a delegation of the Kano State government and the operator of the PPP operator to meet with the Vice President to introduce this to the Vice President, to the federal government. And they have pledged their institutional support, because if what is happening in Kano succeeds, then it can be replicated in other states. And remember that where it is in the states that these things happen, the federal government is just to coordinate where the activities are happening, the economic activities is in the states. Right. So if we have that succeed in the states, then we will now be moving closer to having our national economy, channeled or recalibrated towards the secular economic model.
Thank you very much, Ijeoma Stanley. Great work you're doing there. This conversation has been quite informative. Thank you so much indeed.